Hey, this is Patrick Sullivan. Welcome back to my shop for the second half of this series on making a temple box. The feet start off life as a single long molding cut into the edge of a 3/4 inch walnut board. Remove what wood you can with a table saw, but especially the deep recess in the center. The two outside curves can be easily shaped with small planes. The inside curve is far too deep and narrow for me to reach with any of my router bits, but it can be shaped fairly rapidly with sandpaper wrapped around a thin strip of wood with a rounded edge. You are not removing a lot of wood, so this does not take long. Once you have smooth flowing curves and well-sanded surfaces, then cut the molding strip on the miter saw. Each foot will require 2 pieces joined with a miter. The non-mitered ends will have a decorative shape cut into them. Don't forget that a left foot is the mirror image of a right foot. It's very easy to get 3 left feet. The molding needs to be cut to a width of 1.5 inches or 38 millimeters, and this should be done before mitering, but I forgot. Cut the molding strip into 4 pieces, each long enough for 2 half feet, a left and a right. Before they are cut apart, trace the design for the non-mitered ends. Then cut the shapes with a scroll saw. It's easier to manage all these cuts safely if the pieces are left together as long as possible. Incidentally, this 1.5 inch width is just about the maximum capacity of a scroll saw. Sand the half feet as needed. The deep, tight inside curve can be easily smoothed with a small dowel wrapped with 220 or 320 sandpaper and spun with a drill. This is quick and it's very easy to replace the sandpaper. Glue the half feet together with PVA glue and hold them with tape. Be sure they sit flat before the glue sets. The base is a narrow molding with a lip cut into it on the table saw to hook over the sides of the oak body. Cut this molding into 4 pieces with mitered corners to exactly fit the bottom of the body. Once you're happy with the fit, glue directly to the under edge of the sides of the body. Do not glue the base to the floor of the box. Mark the location of the feet very carefully and leave pencil lines that will guide you when gluing. Then glue the feet to the walnut base. I used one clamp for the center of each foot and an additional clamp on each of the thin ends of the feet. If you don't do this, the moisture in the glue may cause these thin shapes to warp away from the base enough to cause a visible gap. For the tray, I cut some walnut to about 1/4 inch thick. I then planed all the pieces with a hand plane to remove saw marks. I wanted to make the sides of the tray out of quarter sawn walnut, which is less prone to warping, but I only had flat sawn boards. However, since I only needed very narrow strips, it was possible to recut the board, as I'm showing here, to get quarter sawn pieces. Four strips are dovetailed together to make a box. I often use a sawing guide to cut dovetails, but I found that simply cutting them by eye worked well. Thin wood is much more forgiving about angle errors. However, it's important to mark the cuts very accurately. I simply glued the bottom to the sides. This is a risky practice with larger boxes because seasonal wood movement can produce cracks. However, walnut's a very stable wood, and the small size of this tray means that the actual amount of movement will be very small. I cut a shallow rabbet at the bottom of all four sides and inlaid thin strips of maple to provide a nice band of color contrast. I cut the maple strips a little oversized, and when the glue was dry, planed off the excess flush with the bottom. The tray needs a handle so it can be lifted out of the box. I cut a design with some flowing curves and glued it into the tray. I cut a scrap of MDF to support the handle temporarily in the exact center of the box and in a vertical position while the glue was setting up. The tray sits on two runners cut out of 1/8 inch oak. The easiest way to get them even and level is to rip a strip of scrap the correct height, cut it in half, and set the runners directly on the two temporary supports. Be sure to remove them once the clamps are set to avoid the possibility that glue squeeze out will lock them in place. The top consists of 6 separate sub-assemblies that we have to put together. First, I made a set of rafters or joists that fit over the top of the second story. This does nothing but add some detail and color contrast to the inside of the top. I think it's kind of quirky, but interesting. The oak lid has to be glued into the walnut lower roof. I marked the position so the roof was centered and masked all the wood that adjoined the glue line. Sanding the inside of these shapes is frustrating and slow, so be thorough to minimize the need to do cleanup later. This was hard to clamp, so I simply put weights on the lid. Gluing the oak second-story walls into the upper roof is the same process. I joined the second story and upper roof to the lower roof while the assembly was upside down. Clamping these parts is very difficult, so again I just used weights. I experimented with several possible decorative details for the rooftop. In the end, I settled on a shape that echoes the lower roofs and is also reminiscent of the Shinto gateways so common in Japan. It needs to straddle the roof edge, which is not 90 degrees. I cut 2 strips and beveled them to 28 degrees each and glued them together to make a perfect fit. I then shaped the sides on the router in a fashion seen in real temples and added the curved roof shape on the top. I tried out a complex shape actually used on many temple ridge ends, but discarded it in the end as unnecessary and overly fussy, although my wife voted to keep it. I chose a wipe-on oil polyurethane varnish. I have a lot of experience with this product, and one of its advantages is that you can wipe thin layers of finish onto complex shapes without drips and runs where the brush unloads. I apply the first coat with a brush because the raw wood soaks up a surprising amount of finish at first. Do not use a brush for subsequent coats. Use a small piece of soft, clean cloth. Keep the coats very thin, and they'll dry in an hour or two if the air is warm and dry. Sand lightly after every coat for several coats. Soon the surface will become so much smoother that the finish glides on effortlessly. Use steel wool or a gray 3M pad between coats once the surface is dry to remove any dust or surface irregularities. Here's the finished product. I think it's gorgeous. It has very clean lines and yet has a lot of detail. I think it simultaneously looks modern and traditional. The whole piece is small enough to fit on a shelf or a dresser, and yet large enough to be actually useful. And finally, I love the fact that it looks quite different from every point of view. Move it from a low table to a high shelf, and it will transform itself. If you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe to my channel. Just click on my picture in the upper right corner. Thanks for watching.